Now, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control have confirmed 196 new cases of COVID-19 in 11 states and the Federal Capital Territory. This was announced just before midnight on Wednesday on the agency's Twitter handle. Now, according to the breakdown, 87 were recorded in Lagos, 24 in Kano, 18 in Gombe, 17 in Kaduna, 16 in the Federal Capital Territory, 10 in Katsina, 8 in Sokoto, 7 in Edo, 6 in Borno, and 1 each in Yobe, Ebonyi, and Adamawa states. As at 11:55 p.m. on April 29, 2020, a total of 1,728 confirmed cases of COVID-19 have been recorded in Nigeria. 7 more fatalities were unfortunately recorded, bringing the total number of deaths now to 51, while 52 more people were discharged, bringing the total number of recoveries to 307. So, Doctor, as expected, we're seeing some very worrying numbers here, but this is because testing capacity, again, is going up. But you mentioned something yesterday, and to shed more light on it, you're completely right. The numbers that we're seeing coming out of a lot of northern states, Kano, Gombe, Katsina, are extremely worrying numbers. The way forward in terms of how we deal with COVID-19 is a question that we can only find out an answer to when we try different measures and different approaches as we go along the way. But this is extremely worrying to see. What is your take on the latest updates?
Well, first, let me start with the northern states that you have mentioned. Gombe, with 64 new cases, Borno with 59 more cases. The Federal Capital has also increased. And then Kano now has a total of 139 cases. So, and yesterday we were saying that Kano presents a special and peculiar case. Testing was stopped for a few days. Now that you have seen, more testing being done in Kano, you find the numbers increasing. 24 new cases yesterday, bringing the total in Kano now to 139 cases. But the other challenge with Kano is trying to establish exactly what is causing the mass number of deaths that you have in Kano State. And only yesterday, when we were doing the newspaper review, we were told something about verbal autopsy. And I said, well, verbal autopsy is probably unknown to science and medicine, and that what should be done is that, there should be proper investigation. Now, there was a study that was done, a preliminary study that was done on the situation in Kano, and the author of that study was indicating that it looks like many of the deaths in Kano are COVID-19 related, but that this has to be properly established, and that proper autopsies, not verbal autopsy, should be carried out on the persons that died. And incidentally, the federal government, the presidency, speaking through Garuba Shehu, also issued a statement to say verbal autopsy is not the way to go. We must follow the science. We must follow what, the professionals say, not folklore. Africans like to talk a lot. So maybe that's why the governor was talking about verbal autopsy.
No, the concept actually exists. It's just that a concept that is often used in places that are more impoverished, don't have access to equipment for autopsies, etc. So it's not something that should be applied in this instance or used as a cover for a cultural or religious,
But what I'm saying is that we're not dealing with folklore. We're dealing with science, and we're dealing with a very special situation. Maybe for case identification diagnosis, you may need a little bit of folklore, whereby you ask questions for you to be able to get the right thing. But with the case of COVID-19, you really have to rely more on science, particularly in a situation like Kano State, where you have deaths that nobody knows the cause of, because everybody is talking about hypertension, diabetes. Some other people even said it must be the weather. But the experts, the study that I read, says, look, there must be proper autopsy so that we know where we're going. However, the bigger development yesterday was a press briefing that was done by the Presidential Task Force, at which, certain measures were outlined in terms of how the presidential directives with regard to the easing of restrictions will be followed. And also in Lagos State, we had the governor also giving a number of guidelines. I think a similar thing also happened in Delta State when Senator Okowa, the governor of the state, also gave a number of guidelines. And some of the things that they are talking about is that from Monday, May 4, government offices at the federal level will open from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Now, they say people in public places must use face masks, but observe social distancing.
Yes.
There's also an emphasis on personal hygiene. Now, public buses can now operate from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., but also in terms of the number of passengers, social distancing must be observed. Now, the federal government says it's going to reopen the economy gradually, but this is going to be done over a period of 6 weeks in 3 phases. 2 weeks, another 2 weeks, and another 2 weeks. And then enforcement will be done by security agencies. I hope they will pay very careful attention to the enforcement of some of these guidelines that have been given. And I would like to see a situation whereby the Inspector General of Police will join the briefing sessions so that Nigeria needs to prepare, in my view, for the fallout of the easing of the restrictions. Because you could have, as is also the fear in the United Kingdom, a spike in crime. I mean, people have been locked down for so long, they've not had access to their, daily pay jobs. You could find people, taking the laws into their hands and becoming criminal. Now, again, businesses, business centers, or businesses generally, companies, we're told should be fumigated and decontaminated. And then the Presidential Task Force chairman spoke about something that has not been part of the conversation for a while: consideration for people with disabilities. I think it's very good to hear that persons with disabilities are also being focused upon. In the meantime, schools will remain closed. Yes. Religious gatherings remain banned. And then there was also something about paying pensioners. I think it's also good that vulnerable group that have been owed a number of arrears and all of that, will also be paid. And there was talk about continuing with the stimulus packages. Then another thing came from Ihe Kwazu, the Director General of the NCDC, when he said, look, he's not interested in engaging state governments in any argument because, only 3 states have not reported cases: Cross River, Yobe, and Kogi State. Yes. And Ihe Kwazu's position is that those states are not submitting samples. Yes. And I read a story, the Kogi Commissioner of Information arguing with Ihe Kwazu, despite the fact that the NCDC had said, look, governors and their agents should refrain from, making statements that could mislead people. I mean, the interest of the NCDC is to track and stop, the disease, if possible, not engaging in arguments with state governments. Now, restaurants can open, the federal government says, but only for delivery services, not that you... Then when you look at the Lagos State governor, who gave his 9th update yesterday, he's called the incident commander for Lagos State. Some of the measures introduced by the federal government also appeared on his own list. There may be variations in terms of timing. And he also talked about interstate travel. Now, that has to be enforced, because one point made by the Lagos State governor is that for interstate travel, where that is allowed for pharmaceuticals and agricultural produce, you'll find people hiding inside those vehicles. Now, that will be a lot of work for the security agents to make sure that people do not promote community transmission under the guise that restrictions have been eased. These are some of the highlights.
And another highlight that I found quite interesting that came from yesterday as well was the fact that we're purchasing 107,000 cartridges to be used in the deployment of GeneXpert machines. Now, these are machines, of course, that we're converting, as they were normally tuberculosis machines used for tuberculosis testing, that we are now going to use for COVID-19 testing. So I think it's good to see us ramping up our capacity in different ways. But on that note, let's take a very quick commercial break. And when we are back, the morning show continues. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Joining us now is business correspondent Rota Sadiq. Latest headlines in the business world. Good morning, Rota. How are you?
Good morning, Dr. Abasi.
Good morning, Rota.
Nice to be here. The central bank released a circular middle of the afternoon yesterday saying that they are going to resume the provision of foreign exchange for SMEs and for parents that need to pay school fees for their kids that are schooling overseas. Essentially, and this is to the tune, they said, of about $100 million weekly. They also said that for BDCs that need to, selling FX to BDCs for personal travel and business travel once international flights resume. So important, caveats there. They're also going to resume those sales to BDCs as well. And it's a welcome, development. Coincidentally, it did kind of, jive with the World Bank announcing that they had approved the 3.4 billion.
The IMF.
The IMF, excuse me, not the World Bank.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Abasi. We're still waiting for 2.5 billion from the IMF, from the World Bank, and another 1 billion from the African Development Bank. So, so essentially, and the central bank also said that, listen, we want to let the public know that they are, front and center in making sure that foreign exchange is utilized by legitimate end users. So for the parents and also for SMEs that need FX to import the materials that are required for production and so on and so forth, the central bank will be there to provide that as well. So it's a welcome development to know at least that those channels will now be available from the CBN.
Certainly.
Well, I agree with you that it's a welcome development, particularly coming on the heels of the release of the 100% of our quota by the IMF.
Yeah.
And I guess that the CBN perhaps is been given the confidence to do this on the heels of that, on the basis of that, considering the fact that part of the objective is that $3.4 billion will be used to address the demand and supply shocks in the foreign exchange market in Nigeria.
Yes.
So that said. Now, again, there is what you call invisible trade, visible trade, and what they have tried to do is to address both sides. But there are other concerns that have been expressed, by observers. One, the CBN has said that it's going to make sure that it deals with defaulters, that this is not meant to create room for speculators, for all kinds of people who are engaging in sharp practices in the foreign exchange market.
Okay.
I guess that would be important. But if you have a situation whereby, despite the fact that, earlier the CBN had reduced the official window, had fixed the official, has changed the official window for Forex from 305 to 360.
Yes.
And yet the reality is that when you look at the parallel market, the dollar and the naira, the exchange rate is still about 450. Yeah. Then it means that, yes, there may still be room for speculation. So we would like to see how the CBN ramps up its surveillance. However, there are other issues. One, what happens in the I&E window? That's a major source of concern for many observers. Two, many analysts, including the IMF, have been calling for a unification of the foreign exchange system. Yes. Although the CBN had tried to move in that direction, as I said, that has not happened. And, many analysts insist that it's better to have better certainty within the foreign exchange regime situation in Nigeria in order for us to achieve whatever objectives the monetary authorities may be talking about. Three, another major issue of concern is our import substitution policy, which is a very controversial position that the Godwin Emefiele-led CBN are taking by restricting Forex on about 41 imports, I think. Yes. About 41 imports. Now, so when you now say you are going to allow the BDCs, Bureau de Change, access to Forex for XMEs, now these XMEs, would that import restriction list, will it still be there? But of course, the long-term objective will be how to ensure macroeconomic stability. Right. And the bankers are saying that maybe this is even now time for the CBN to take a look at the cash reserve ratio and the loan deposit ratio. Because as you know, the bankers are not happy that they get penalized when they don't meet the LDR limit. Yes. And it's easier for them to go and deal with treasury bills and OMO, but the CBN says it wants to ensure private sector lending, as that objective been met. Right. So there are challenges, there are other areas of concern, but as you said, we'll see how this works out.
We'll see how it works out.
Certainly. Reuters, thank you for the updates. We'll see you tomorrow. It's time now for a short break. When we're back, we'll be joined by Aaron Akirijola for some more updates on COVID-19. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Joining us now is Rotus, Aaron Akerejola with COVID-19 updates for today.
Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning, Lena. Good morning, Doctor. I can see your color coordinating this morning.
I didn't even realize.
It's a coincidence.
I actually
Which is a good thing.
realize.
Which is a good thing.
Second time this week.
Okay, let's bring the global figures, all right, and the latest. And so far, so good. 3.2 million cases of the virus has actually been confirmed globally, with the total death toll standing at 227,705 right now. As I speak, those are some of the live figures actually coming in from the Johns Hopkins University. And zooming in and chiming into Africa, as we stand right now, South Africa has actually overtaken Egypt this, as of today, with the most number of cases, which stands at 5,350, while Egypt has 5,226. Morocco has also risen as third, 4,321, and Algeria 3,848. And you can actually see that it's actually growing exponentially, with Cameroon making the top 5 there with 1,832. Those are the numbers. Nigeria has 1,728. We are edging closer as it stands right about now.
Well, I mean, the numbers keep increasing.
Yes.
Globally, the United States has become the epicenter now, with over 1 million cases and with over 61,000 deaths. And then in that order, you have Spain, you have Italy, you have France, you have the UK, you have Germany. And ironically, when you look at that table, China, which was the original epicenter, is now number 10.
Ironic, isn't it?
Well, I mean, quite ironic. And China, if you look at the numbers throughout, China has just about 82,000 plus cases, with a number of deaths about 4,633. And people will wonder, I mean, why...
A lot of people have asked, are China lying about their numbers?
Why is it that China has such a low figure, even when it started in China? And you'll find higher figures in the US and in Europe.
Yeah.
Now, in Africa, Africa has moved from 30,000 cases to about 34,000 plus cases. And you are quite right. Yesterday, South Africa recorded its highest number of about 354. That's the highest number so far. And in total, South Africa has up to about 103 deaths. But in terms of, in spite of the statistics, we have seen an attempt to ease the lockdown in many African countries. Ghana is saying that the decision it took to relax restrictions in Accra and Kumasi has not resulted in any explosion, and that it was a wise decision. Now, in Sierra Leone, there was even a prison riot in Sierra Leone by persons in prison saying, look, they too will want to enjoy the benefit of the easing of restrictions. In South Sudan, Omar al-Bashir's lawyers, his legal representatives, they're saying that he should be moved from the prison and allowed to be under house arrest because a case of COVID-19 was reported in the prison where he was. In Tunisia, they are also easing restrictions. Zimbabwe also is opening up the tobacco market. Malawi says, they too will do cash transfers. So these are some of the developments across the continent of Africa. However, I think that this move to ease restrictions, as I've always argued, people should just be cautious. And even here in Nigeria, we need to be very careful.
Yeah.
Now, what we will have left by next week will probably be interstate lockdown. But intrastate, it looks like there's going to be a lot of movement. So how do you rule out community transmission, even within the state itself? Now, I've cited on this program before the example of Denver, Colorado, during the Spanish flu in 1918, when the relaxation of restrictions led to a second peak, and you had many deaths. Another example to remember is what happened in Marseille, in France, in 1720, between 1720 and 1722. The population of the city of Marseille at that time was 90,000. When they allowed goods on a ship because of pressures from businessmen to enter the town, 50,000 out of that 90,000 population disappeared between 1720 and 1722. So, you know, this is not a rocket science. We need to learn from history and just be careful. And I hope the authorities know what they are doing across Africa where restrictions are being eased.
Certainly, but with the new virus as well, the unfortunate truth is we can only as well learn along the way. Aaron, thank you very much for today's update, and we will see you tomorrow.